It was a quiet evening on the edge of town, the kind of evening where people keep to themselves and mind their business. Three bikers, men everyone usually avoided, pulled into a lonely gas station. Their engines were loud, their jackets were worn, their tattoos made strangers step aside. People saw them and instantly judged them, but none of them expected what would happen next. As the bikers parked their motorcycles, one of them noticed something. A fragile elderly woman sitting alone at the curb, shaking, hugging a thin torn blanket that barely covered her shoulders. Her clothes were old, her shoes were ripped, and the cold wind hit her like sharp knives. People walked past her without even looking. Cars drove by like she didn't exist. But the three bikers stopped. They looked at each other. Something in their eyes changed, because behind all the leather and noise, there were hearts that hadn't forgotten what kindness meant. And in that moment, the story began. The bikers weren't sure what to do at first. They weren't used to moments like this. Moments where silence felt heavier than the engines they rode in on. One of them, the tallest biker, a man people usually crossed the street to avoid, slowly walked toward the elderly woman. He cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The old woman lifted her head, confused, as if she hadn't heard someone speak to her kindly in a very long time. Her eyes were tired, red from cold and exhaustion. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. I'm fine," she whispered. But it was clear she wasn't. The second biker stepped forward, his voice softer than anyone expected. "You look freezing. When was the last time you ate?" The woman hesitated, then lowered her gaze to the ground. "I don't remember." Her voice cracked, not because she wanted pity, but because she had learned to hide her pain for so many years. The third biker, the quiet one, looked around the gas station. People kept staring not at her, but at them, judging, assuming the worst, and that made him even more determined. He removed his leather jacket, the only warmth he had, and gently placed it over her shoulders. The old woman froze, shocked by the gesture. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. No one had treated her like a human being in a very long time. And at that moment, something broke inside all three bikers. Not anger, not sadness, but a realization. Sometimes the people the world fears the most are the ones with the kindest hearts. The bikers helped the old woman stand slowly. Her legs shook from the cold, and maybe from the weight of the life she had carried alone for far too long. They guided her to sit on a crate near the gas station wall, where the light was warmer. For a moment, she simply stared at the ground, holding the biker's jacket tightly around her shoulders, as if she was afraid someone might take it away. The tallest biker crouched down in front of her. "Ma'am, what's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Margaret." They nodded gently, giving her time. People rarely asked homeless folks their names, and they never asked with kindness. The quiet biker spoke next, his voice low but soft. "Margaret, how long have you been out here?" Her hands trembled. Her eyes flickered with memory. Painful memory. I had a house once." Her voice cracked. "A husband, a son." The bikers exchanged looks, not pity, but respect. They could tell this story had been locked inside her for years. Margaret swallowed hard. "My husband died first. Then my son moved far away. He said he was too busy to visit. Life got expensive. And I couldn't keep up." A single tear rolled down her cheek. "But I didn't want to bother anyone," she added quickly, almost defensively. "I thought, maybe I could manage." The second biker leaned closer. "Why didn't you ask for help?" She gave a sad, hollow smile. "Because no one ever asked if I needed any." The bikers felt that line cut straight through them. They had lived their own rough lives. People feared them, judged them, but even they had someone to lean on, their biker family. Margaret had no one, and at that moment, something shifted in their hearts. This wasn't just a woman who needed help. This was a human being who had been invisible for far too long. The quiet biker finally said the words none of them expected. "Margaret, you're not sleeping on the street tonight. Not while we're here." She looked up sharply, eyes wide, tears gathering again. "No, no, you boys don't have to." But the tallest biker shook his head firmly. "No arguments. Tonight you're with us." For the first time in years, Margaret didn't feel forgotten. She felt safe. The bikers gently helped Margaret stand again, guiding her toward their motorcycles. But they didn't take her anywhere dangerous. They took her somewhere warm. A tiny roadside diner, the kind that smells like coffee, fried eggs, and memories. The waitress looked surprised when 3 big bikers walked in, but even more surprised when she saw the old woman wrapped in a leather jacket between them. They sat her in a booth with the softest cushion. Margaret looked overwhelmed, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to sit somewhere clean anymore. The quiet biker slid a menu toward her and said gently, "Choose anything. Tonight you eat." Her hands shook as she picked up the menu, her eyes scanning the food like she hadn't seen real meals in weeks. The tallest biker added, "And don't look at the prices. We got you." She gave a small, trembling smile, the first genuine smile they had seen. When her food arrived, a warm bowl of chicken soup, a sandwich, and steaming tea, she stared at it longer than she ate. Then she whispered something they didn't expect. "I used to make soup like this for my son, every Sunday." She looked up at the bikers suddenly, panic flashing in her eyes, as if she had said too much. The quiet biker leaned forward. "What happened to him, Margaret?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She wiped her eyes slowly. "He doesn't want me anymore." The bikers froze. "What do you mean, doesn't want you?" one of them asked softly. Margaret took a shaky breath. "He said I was becoming a burden. He said I slowed down his life." The words landed like a punch. She pushed her teacup away with trembling fingers. "But he was my only child," she whispered. "And I didn't know how to live without him." The bikers felt it, that deep ache that comes when someone you love decides you're not worth loving back. Margaret continued, "After he left, everything just collapsed. I lost the house. My health got worse. And little by little, I disappeared." The waitress standing behind the counter heard the story too. Even she wiped her eyes. The quiet biker reached across the table, placing his large tattooed hand over her thin, fragile one. "You didn't disappear," he said. "You just got lost. And now, you're found." Margaret burst into tears. Not the broken kind, but the kind that comes when someone finally sees you. And for the first time in years, she felt human again. As Margaret sat in the diner booth, surrounded by people who barely understood what she had survived, something inside her cracked open. For months she had lived in silence. No home, no family, no one calling her name. But for the first time, these bikers made her feel seen, like she wasn't just another forgotten face on the street. The waitress approached slowly, her harsh expression softening the moment she saw Margaret's trembling hands. And the people who had judged her earlier, now watched in quiet sympathy, touched by something they didn't expect to feel. Margaret whispered a tiny thank you, so fragile and broken that it carried more pain than words could hold. And that's when the biker leader noticed something that chilled his blood. A hospital bracelet, still on her wrist. Suddenly, this wasn't just kindness anymore. This was a sign. Something was wrong, and they needed to know the truth. For a moment, the entire diner fell silent. The biker leader stared at the hospital bracelet around Margaret's frail wrist, a thin white band, worn and dirty, but still holding the stamp of truth. Margaret pulled her arm back gently, her eyes dropping to the table, almost as if she was ashamed. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because life had done everything wrong to her. The bikers exchanged worried looks. "Margaret, why do you still have this on?" the leader asked quietly. She didn't answer. Instead, she just shook her head, tears building in her tired eyes. Pain, fear, and a story she'd been holding alone. The waitress stepped closer, placing a hand over her mouth. Even the customers who had judged her before didn't look away now, they felt it too. Something was deeply wrong, and these bikers knew they couldn't leave her like this. That bracelet wasn't just plastic. It was a cry for help. By the time the sun began to set, the world outside seemed quieter, almost like it was holding its breath. The bikers walked slowly with Margaret toward the edge of town, the old woman leaning on the leader's arm, her steps shaky but her spirit finally breathing again. For years she had carried nothing but pain. Pain from losing her home, her family, her dignity. Pain from being invisible in a world that never turned back to look for her. But today, for the first time in a long time, someone finally did. When they reached the small shelter on the hill, the biker leader gently placed a blanket over her shoulders. The other bikers stood behind him, no longer rough strangers, but protectors. And Margaret, she just stared at them, eyes trembling, lips shaking like she wanted to say 1,000 things but couldn't find even one. The leader knelt beside her and whispered, "You're not alone anymore, not while we're still breathing." And that broke her, because she wasn't just cold, she wasn't just hungry, she had been unseen. But kindness, real kindness, doesn't need permission before it changes a life. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost too weak to hear. "Thank you for remembering I'm still human." He smiled gently and wiped a tear from her cheek. The other bikers bowed their heads in respect, rough men with soft hearts. And as the night rolled in, the shelter lights warmed the cold air. And for the first time in years, Margaret slept in a real bed, with warmth, safety, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the world hadn't forgotten her after all. Because sometimes, family isn't blood. Sometimes, family is made of the people who kneel beside you when the rest of the world walks past. And that is the heart of humanity. This is KindSoul Corner, where stories remind us that even the smallest act of kindness can save a life.